Aloha, and welcome to another episode of Inside the Senate. My name is Jacob Aki, and I'm the Director of Communications. And this evening, I'm joined by Senator Jarrett Keohokalole. Senator Keohokalole represents Senate District 24, and he is the Majority Floor Leader. Senator Keohokalole is also the Chair of the Senate Committee on Health. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Aloha. Thank you for having me, Jacob.
Before we start talking about the hot topics of the legislative session, can you tell us a little bit about you, your background, and how a boy from Kaneohe became the Windward Senator?
Yeah, mahalo. Like you said, I grew up in Kaneohe. My family is originally from Kaneohe. The neighborhood I grew up in is a part of our ancestral lands. So it's really a privilege to represent that area and my ohana and my community. That's the reason why I ran for office, because I'm one of the few folks that are lucky to be able to say that. And it's getting more and more difficult for young families, especially, to be able to stay here and raise kids in the places where they grew up. So that's why I ran originally for the House in 2014, and then for the Senate in 2018. I'm also an attorney. I went to the University of Hawaii, and then I went to the Law School afterward. And I always wanted to serve the public, and this opportunity arose, and I felt like if I didn't take the chance and run for office now and be active, civically like this, then hard to grumble. So I'm really grateful to be here.
So you were first elected to the state legislature in 2014, where you were in the House of Representatives until 2018, when you won the Senate District 24 seat. How has that transition been from serving in the House to serving in the Senate?
It's been good. It's a lot bigger district. So in terms of representing constituents, I think there's a lot more responsibility because there's a much broader area. I have a large part of Kailua, mostly all of the Mauka area of Kailua, Aikahi, the Marine base, and then all of Kaneohe, all the way out to Ahuimanu. So it's a large area, and then also, it's been nice because I've been in for a number of years now. I just have more experience, so it's a little bit easier to legislate. I just know a little bit more context. I have a larger network of people I can reach out to for help and information on things to try and make decisions. So it's a much bigger responsibility and role now that I'm in the Senate, and I enjoy it.
So prior to becoming the committee chair for the Senate Committee on Health, during your first couple of years in the Senate, you were the chair of the Senate Committee on Technology. On the show last week, we had Senate President Kochi, and when I asked him about the new virtual process for testimony, for committee hearings, and for floor sessions, he really credited you with pushing the Senate towards that direction. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, as you know, everything has gone virtual. But this was something that the Senate has already been working on for the past couple of years, primarily during your time in the Senate. Can you kind of talk about that? Because now, with our new process, people don't have to come down to the Capitol, and people in rural communities and those on the neighbor islands now have an easier time in trying to participate in the legislative process. So can you quickly talk about that? Because I know you've been a big advocate for it.
Sure, and the Senate president really does deserve the credit on this because he was the one that helped leverage the funding that it took to buy the cameras and all of the equipment so that we can do the streaming that we're doing now. As in my role as chair of the technology committee, I really was trying to push the state government, but also the legislature, because we need to practice what we preach to adopt modern technology. A lot of the state government operations are conducted the same way they've been done for a long time. We've only recently went paperless on things. We only recently went to electronic payroll. And so part of that was in our legislative process. It makes sense. It's very difficult for folks, even on Oahu, folks even who live in town to go to a hearing on the matter that they're interested in when the hearing is on a weekday, downtown where you got to pay for parking, in the morning or in the afternoon. And so I was just trying to push to make things accessible because we have streaming capability that everybody uses now anyway, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And so when the pandemic hit and everyone was forced inside, I thought it was an opportunity for us to be as aggressive. For me, as someone who values the adoption and the need for us to move in this direction, I thought it was an opportunity for us to be as aggressive as possible out of necessity. And so I'm really proud of the members of the Senate and of the legislature for taking this on. It's a heavy lift, and there have been growing pains. There will be other mistakes made and challenges to overcome with moving online. But I think it's really critical at this time, especially when we don't want to encourage large groups of people to gather, but we still want to be able to push issues, even if they're controversial, that are in the public interest.
Yeah, and we were talking before this live broadcast with one of the producers, and if I'm not mistaken, you were one of the first legislators during this pandemic to start doing these Facebook Live talk stories, because early on in the pandemic, people weren't getting accurate information on what was going on. And I think the purpose of your Facebook Live talk stories was to try to get out there accurate information. Can you also share about that? Because as our producer John was saying earlier, you would do these daily 7 p.m. broadcasts, and you got a lot of people. I think one of the ones I watched, you had over 100 people watching. So can you talk about how that came about?
Yeah, it just kind of came about organically because, like you said, we were being inundated with phone calls and emails, and then people were messaging us on social media. I wasn't really active on social media at the time, so it was hard to keep up. And so one night, my wife, we were sitting at the table, and I was explaining to her what was happening. And I was actually looking at it earlier today, some of the old videos, because tomorrow last year was when the NBA shut down 1 year ago. And that was really when the world turned upside down.
Yep. Because
the mandate, the shutdown and the quarantine and all that stuff happened, like within the 2 weeks after that. And so I remember, I was watching one of the little clips, and in it, I was talking about a meme that was going around on social media that was encouraging everybody to gargle salt water because it would help you. It would help with your immunity to COVID. And people were asking me about this, and I was like, okay. I was explaining it to my wife, and she just said, why don't you just go live right now and tell me everything you said? And that was kind of how it started. And people started asking us questions, and we started getting feedback. They would ask things that I hadn't thought of, so we could follow up and go get answers. And it kind of just went from there. And the other thing is, you're right. There was a lot of stuff going on at the time, and we weren't necessarily getting really active communication from the administration. They were still trying to figure out what was going on as well. So, I've tried to approach this job in a way to make sure that we are accessible to people. And one of the things I know from social media is that different groups of people consume information different ways. Kupuna like to read newspaper often. A lot of people get information from the mail or from TV news, but a lot of young people get it from Instagram or from Facebook stories. And you gotta hit all the different mediums in order to really get information out to folks. Otherwise, people will find information themselves, and it might not always be right.
Well, as you said, March really marks that 1 year since this pandemic began, and as you said, 1 year since the world turned upside down. Early on in the COVID-19 pandemic, the Senate set up the Special Committee on COVID-19. And over the course of the pandemic, and probably for the rest of 2020, you folks were dealing with some pretty serious issues in the state's response to COVID-19. And you were a member of that special committee. Can you talk about the work that you folks did? Because at least in my view, that special committee doesn't get the credit it deserves for a lot of our state's COVID-19 policies and the way we responded to this pandemic.
Yeah, I think, the chair, Donovan Dela Cruz, deserves the lion's share of that credit because he pulled us together like in one afternoon because we had a series of meetings. This is all that same week last year, this time last year. We had one big cabinet meeting with all the heads of the state agencies in Senator De La Cruz's committee hearing room, the Ways and Means room. And he was asking everybody, going down the line, asking people what their contingency plans were. And it just became clear. Ultimately, one of the meetings, the governor was in there with the chair of the Department of Health. And it just felt like there needed to be some oversight, and especially as the emergency orders started to come in, because the governor has extraordinary powers when he declares an emergency order. Everybody's used to it now, but there weren't necessarily any requirements for him to share information. And so we were digging in and really pushing hard on some things. The biggest one probably was the quarantine, the airport quarantine. There was a lot of fear in those days at the end of March last year, and it was a real big concern. A lot of folks wanted us to shut the airports down, and we had to have the whole conversation about how, we didn't have that authority, but we did have we did have powers to do other things like the quarantine, the hotel one key policy, the rental car thing, masks. It was just, all those issues from March until now. We were involved with a lot of it, and it was really significant work. It was a really wild time to be a part of it.
And now that the legislative session has started, a lot of the COVID-19 work that the Senate has been working on has kind of been put upon you as the chair of the Senate Committee on Health. Obviously, over the past couple of months, the big conversation around COVID has been the state's vaccination efforts. Back in December, the FDA approved Pfizer and Moderna. A couple of weeks ago, Johnson & Johnson was approved, and we're now seeing those vaccinations be distributed across our state. My question to you is, how would you rate the state's COVID-19 vaccination rollout plan?
So that's a good question. I haven't actually checked the metrics that I think we should be using to grade ourselves. A lot of what I've done is just try and make sure that the members in the different areas of the state, the other senators, have access to information when they get requests from the community, and that when we get feedback from the community, from the healthcare providers, from the nursing homes, that they have access to answers really quickly. If you look at the number of people that have been vaccinated so far,
over 400,000.
It's well over 400,000, which is almost a third of the state at this point. I think when you compare us to the rest of the country, what percentage of the population has been vaccinated, whether it's being done fairly, and you don't have massive fraud or people skipping the priority, or selling the vaccine priority and distribution to the wealthier, to the highest bidder, or to wealthier communities. We just haven't had any of those really controversial problems. There's always going to be problems with the rollout when you're trying to vaccinate 1 million people. And the thing hasn't gone perfectly, but I've been satisfied with the way they've mobilized, how they've worked with the private healthcare community has been really great.
Let's talk about that because a lot of the healthcare providers like Kauai Pacific Health, Kaiser Permanente, they've been organizing these mass vaccine distribution pods or points of distribution. In early February, I was on the tour with you and the other members of the Senate Special COVID Committee, and we took a tour of the vaccination pod at Pier 2. Can you share about that? Because I think many of the senators who attended that, they walked away very impressed with what was going on down there at those pods.
Oh yeah, it was a massive, military style mobilization. That's a huge facility. If you've never been to Pier 2, the thing is, it's the size of 5 or 6 giant ballrooms. That whole flow through area, the way they did their registration, it was all distanced. They even had, they had music, Hawaiian music being played in the waiting area. After folks get their shots, they need to stay and wait and be monitored. They were playing music to calm people down. They had parking. They had attendance for the seniors and for disabled folks who needed parking. It was done really well and in a really organized manner. And so I think that also speaks to it. So I think, when you talk about grading our response and our effort, it doesn't only include the Department of Health, it includes all of the private providers, the pharmacies, everybody who's involved. And when you compare us to the rest of the country, I think we are doing really well. The shots get off the boat and they go into arms really quickly. And we've done a much better job, and it's taken some pushing and some dialogue. But my main priority is that they communicate as effectively as possible. They get the information out as quickly as possible and be responsive to people's concerns. And that, I think, has been greatly improved and what I'm really happy about.
The vaccination efforts are based off of a tiered metric system. So it seems as if we already have a plan for these vaccination rollouts. What do you think the next steps are? I mean, we are getting people vaccinated. We've heard from the federal government that there should be enough vaccines for every American adult by the end of May. At least from what I've seen from the Department of Health, our students should be getting their vaccination by the end of the year. Once we get everybody vaccinated, what's next?
It's a good question. I try not to, give my own advice about what I think should happen, because we got to be consistent and we got to follow the opinions of the doctors, the actual public health experts. And so I thought it was really interesting this week that the CDC came out and said that groups of people that are vaccinated can gather together and they don't need masks. So I don't actually know what's possible. I was hopeful that we could do graduations this year, because that would be, I think, a really significant step back towards normal life again. And the DOE has already taken steps in that direction. Sports would be really great. It would be awesome to have some of the large venue events come back as well. But I think most of all, it's more about quality of life. If our kupuna, feel comfortable again to socialize, to, go back into their normal routines, and for us to kind of return back to a similar way of life that we had, 1 year ago, that's really the big thing I would like to push toward and really would like to see. But it's going to be at the direction of the healthcare experts in Hawaii, working in partnership with the federal government.
Sorry, I was on mute. But before we leave this vaccination conversation, what is your message to those who are still unsure if they are going to be vaccinated when it's their turn?
Talk to your grandmas and your grandpas and your family. Many kupuna have been vaccinated already. Talk to the people that that have already been vaccinated. And if you don't know if they have, then ask around and see what their experiences are. At this point, thousands of teachers, doctors, nurses, and kupuna have been vaccinated. And so ask them their experiences. Like I said, I follow the guidance of the doctors. The chair of the Department of Health, Libby Char, is an emergency room doctor. She has seen, emergency room doctors see it all. The good, the bad, and the very, very ugly. And her recommendation has been full support, all of the vaccines. So I'm going to listen to the doctors. I'm not a doctor. So we got to make sure we're consistent and we're listening to people who know what they're talking about.
Thanks. I want to move now to the legislative session. We are at about the halfway mark. Third reading for many Senate bills were held yesterday, and a number of bills have passed through the Senate relating to minimum wage, relating to the development of Kaka'ako Makai. There were a slew of bills that are moving over to the House, 420 bills to be exact. What is your take on what you've seen so far in this first half of the legislative session?
Well, so I think there's a lot of attention this year placed on addressing the impacts of the pandemic. A lot of the legislation that passed and frankly didn't pass, or items that weren't even introduced, were a result of the recognition that we have a really strained budget situation, that a lot of people are out of work, and a lot of small businesses are struggling. So I'm actually pretty proud. I've said in the past, when there are real crises, the legislature, in my experience, has been pretty good about stepping up to address things without letting the petty politics that you see in DC screw stuff up, happen over here. So one example is the unemployment trust fund bill that we just passed and the governor signed, because we fast-tracked it to make sure it passed before tax day, that lowers the unemployment premium rates that businesses are going to have to pay, because we paid out so much unemployment benefits this year. The businesses pay into the trust fund that pays out those benefits. It's $700 million short at this point. And the way the system works is the small businesses are expected to compensate for that deficit from paying higher premiums. We know that they can't handle a giant spike like that right now. So we took some steps in the bill to step in and provide them some relief, so we don't have any more business closures unnecessarily, than we already have now, because it's a hard time.
Senator, you are also the chair of the Native Hawaiian Caucus here at the Hawaii State Legislature, and there has been a number of Native Hawaiian focused bills that have moved through the Senate. One of the hotly debated topics of the Senate floor session yesterday was the Kaka'ako Makai bill. Can you briefly talk about what that bill is and what that bill does? Because, in my reading through the testimony, there seems to be a lot of people who are for the bill, but there also seems to be a lot of people who are against the bill. So can you kind of share about, what those conversations were on the floor, and to share, your own personal view of that particular issue?
Sure, and I acknowledge it's a controversial bill because, sorry, my kid's fighting over here in the background. But that's the reason why I supported it, is we need housing. And, 15 years ago, the community in Kaka'ako came together and they fought a really bad luxury housing proposal in that area. But it's been 15 years, and OHA has now taken possession of those lands. They're not public lands, they're trust fund assets that OHA wants to utilize for housing. And so I supported the bill because we are so desperately short housing that it's something that we just need to take more seriously. I think it's a crisis. I have friends and family, classmates who are moving away. We have negative migration. We have more people leaving the state than are coming in. And I tell you what, they're still coming in. It's not a reduction in the amount of people that are moving here. The wealthy are coming. It's the local folks that are leaving because they cannot find anywhere to live. Homelessness, brain drain, so many of our social issues, the fact that we're short teachers, doctors, and police officers. And when you do the surveys of why those folks are leaving, it's because they cannot afford housing, even the doctors. So, I just thought that it was a important conversation for us to have, because we cannot continue to have these debates about individual housing projects being rejected because for one reason or another, the project should go somewhere else. We're either going to build in our urban areas around these transit-oriented development zones, or we're gonna have to be honest with ourselves about the fact that we have not prepared a place for our kids to live. my kids making noise in the background. I want them to be able to stay here. And I'm really concerned about whether that's a possibility. Lots of people
questions, sorry, Senator. One of the questions we got from a viewer via Instagram, and I think this really relates to this particular topic, is what can we do to ensure that we create housing for our keiki? Because as you talked about, there seems to be a large number of luxury homes that are being developed, but how do we make sure that we develop homes that are affordable for our local people, and particularly for our keiki?
Yeah, we have 25 years of housing policy that has failed, right? So I think acknowledging that, number one, that it's not working, and number two, being willing, and it does take some courage, and it will be controversial, because any individual idea you can poke holes in, but in the broad scheme of things, if we're not making fundamental change to the way we do housing policy in Hawaii, we're going to continue to allow this to happen. This one-child policy, I said on the floor, we basically enacted a one-child policy in Hawaii, because if you have more than one, you're going to have a hard time finding somewhere for them to live. So I think we need to be innovative, and I'm fine with, and I support some of these efforts to be aggressive, crack down on foreign speculation. Some of it is price-related, tax policy, leasehold. We need to do something different, and we need to do it fast, and we need to do it big, because the size of the problem is significant. And if we don't take action, then nothing's going to happen. And that's not good enough for me.
Senator, we have about 1 minute and 14 seconds left, and and we do have some questions that are coming in on social media. And if we aren't going to be able to cover all of it, but I think one of the questions that came in is, so what's next? As we head into the next half of the legislative session, what are you hoping to see on April 29th when the session adjourns? And I know that's a big question, but what are your hopes for the rest of the session?
So I think they go back to my goals for the session at the beginning of the year, which are, number one, we got to address the budget situation. The federal government, Senator Schatz just announced $1.6 billion are coming the state's way to shore up our budget situation, so that we don't have to cancel things like HIV prevention, language access. Those are some of our programs that were on the chopping blocks. Mm-hmm. Layoffs for teachers' assistants, and some of these really terrible things that we were about to be forced to do because of budget constraints. The second thing is the pandemic operations. We still need to do contact tracing and testing and providing PPE for our first responders and our police officers, fire department guys, and then the vaccine rollout. And then with the bandwidth that we have left, it's projecting forward how we're gonna.
Sorry, Senator. I hate to cut you off, but time is running out. But I just wanted to thank you for joining us, and for those of you at home, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you in 2 weeks on Inside the Senate. Mahalo.
Aloha.